Remember in 2019 when we all said that we wanted the 2020s to be kind of like the 1920s? Well, there are a few things we wouldn't want to go back to, and that brings us to the topic of this video. Welcome to episode 4 of 52 movies. In this episode we will be talking about Radium Girls and the history behind it. Radium Girls centers on a group of girls working in a radium factory as dial painters. They paint the dials for wristwatches so that they glow in the dark. However, it is discovered that radium is poisonous and the girls eventually start getting sick and dying. This movie is about the class action lawsuit that was brought against the company they work for, American Radium. It is loosely based on the true events that happened in the 1920s. This case was super impactful and helped workers' rights for years to come. The main characters that we need to know about the most are the two main characters, which is Bessie and Joe, and they are sisters. The movie begins with actual footage from the 1920s, and it is interspersed throughout the movie. We're introduced to our main characters, Bessie and Joe. They both work at American Radium as dial painters. They really enjoy it, and Joe is the highest ranking dial painter in her whole factory. They are the main providers of their household, and they also have an older sister named Mary. She died a few years prior to the movie. Joe begins to experience some weird symptoms. She begins feeling weak, lethargic, and eventually her teeth start falling out. Bessie is really worried about Joe, so she asked her boss if there was a doctor that she could see. The boss sends the company doctor to their house to examine Joe. He's very dismissive and insists that Joe is fine. However, Joe knows she's not fine, and so he says, if it'll make you feel any better, we'll run some tests. The test results come back and the doctor diagnoses her with syphilis, which is impossible because Joe is a virgin. This was also the diagnosis that their sister got not too long before she died. So they become suspicious and they start digging around. Bessie finds Mary's old diary and she starts looking through that. So Bessie voices her concerns to her boyfriend and he directs her to the workers' rights advocates. So Bessie and Joe go to the workers' rights advocates, and Wiley, a woman that works there, says that they have received a lot of complaints from dial painters who got sick. Wiley believes that the company knows all about the dangers of radium, and she says that they even hired a team of researchers from Harvard to do a study on it. However, the study is not able to be accessed. It's locked by American Radium. The workers' rights advocates set the sisters up with a doctor that is not associated with American Radium, and they diagnosed Joe with radium necrosis. This is a disease that's very fast. They give her about 2 years to live at most. And Bessie is in good health, but there is still some radiation in her bones that they found. It could lead to dangers later on, but thankfully they had already quit the company at this point. The difference in their diagnosis leads to one major cause. Joe licked the paintbrushes that they used to paint on the dials, and Bessie did not. This saved Bessie's life, but doomed Joe's. The workers' rights advocates tell them that since their sister Mary was also a worker at American Radium, they would need to exhume her body and examine it. When they do an examination, they find that her body is so radioactive that her bones glowed in the dark. So people from American Radium hear about things that they are doing, so they come to them with an offer. They get $300 each for their suffering and for their silence. The company is still denying the dangers of radium, and so the sisters bring this offer to the advocates, and they voice their concerns that maybe this is not the best route to go because they're going to silence you and use this against you, so they deny their offer. Bessie goes to the factory again and tries to warn the workers but gets kicked out. She does win over one worker. Her name is Paula, and so she joins their class action lawsuit. And the advocates find another woman named Doris who is wheelchair bound because of the disease, and she joins their case as well. Now they have a big job of finding a lawyer. which is going to be very hard because American Radium is so powerful. They eventually do find a lawyer, and it's someone who's fresh out of law school. So it comes to the day where they're supposed to be in court, and the morning of, Jo has an emergency. Her jaw is breaking apart and falling out of her mouth, and so she goes to the hospital and Bessie goes to court for them. The media is really skeptical of their claims at this point. Like I said before, American Radium is super powerful, so they have a lot of influence over everything. The media believes that these girls are lying and that they actually do have syphilis, which was the diagnosis that the company doctor kept giving out, and shame them because of it. They think that they are doing this lawsuit to kind of cover for the promiscuous life. The other girls at the factory are terrified that this may be true, but they're also scared that they could lose their job. Eventually, the girls get a rock thrown through their window with paper attached to it, and the paper says Radium Whores. During the case, it is exposed that the company doctor didn't have a license to be a practicing physician. He was a professor, and I think a psychology major or something like that, so he didn't have even the right to diagnose these girls with syphilis. And I believe that they were diagnosed with syphilis in order to shame them into silence, and make them scared to really come forward. Then one of the researchers comes forward, the ones that worked on the study that American Radium had paid for. She comes forward against them, which was a shock to everybody. And she basically says what they found in the study and that American Radium had known about this the whole time. So one of the founders / owners, I think, of American Radium was in a relationship with her sister Mary. They find entries in her diary kind of hinting at that they were really close. In one of the entries, it even says that Leach had warned Mary not to lick the brushes. And so they submit the diary as evidence, and Bessie goes to find Leach. She eventually finds Leach in the hospital. He's also dying. Bessie convinces him to testify against his company in honor of Mary. However, when it comes to the last minute and he's on the stand, he changes his mind and says that he never had any relationship to Mary. American Radium asked the court to convene for 18 weeks. The judge grants their request, which I believe should not have been done, but this was just to save their own tails. They knew that this was a life or death situation for these girls, and they knew that they might die in between the court cases, you know? A federal judge comes to the girl's lawyer and strikes up a deal. The deal is each person gets $10,000 and they will shut down one factory, which is the one that they worked for. They will also put a warning on radium. However, radium will not become illegal. They all reluctantly sign the agreement since they believe that this was their last chance to get any sort of justice. So at the end of the movie, they include some text that flashes onto the screen. I'm assuming that this is true facts. However, some of the things in this movie was not true, so take these with a grain of salt. So they used radium on clocks until the 70s was one of the things that they said, which was wild, because that was, what, about 50 years after all this happened, and they were still using radium on wristwatches. It was also revealed that the judge who got them their settlement had stocks in American Radium. Wow. So then we get to the last fact that they give us, and it's that if you put a Geiger counter on the top of all of these Radium Girls' graves, it will show radiation emanating from their bodies for over 1,000 years. And this one I'm pretty sure is true because I've read it in multiple different sources, so yeah. Alright, so now we're on to notes and critiques. First one is sexism. Obviously sexism existed in the 1920s, no one can deny that it happened. But the way the doctor just kind of didn't take the girl seriously wasn't just because he was involved in American Radium, and the way he throws around an STD wasn't just a coincidence either. The STD diagnosis was a way for the doctor to degrade these women. It was a way for him to silence them. And it was also used by the media to discredit them. So yeah, it didn't need to be mentioned that sexism existed in the 1920s. It's a given. But I just thought I would mention it anyways. And honestly, doctors still really don't take women seriously enough. Some things never change. One of my big complaints about this movie is that it felt like there was so much going on all at once. There was too many subplots and too many things going on in the background that we couldn't really focus on one thing or the other. And then one of the subplots just kind of dropped off in the middle of the movie. It's very weird to me how they structured this. And I felt like they could have done a better job at incorporating every element that they wanted to into the movie. And giving time to it. Maybe actually having a longer runtime would have been good for them, because they would have been able to flesh out all of the points that they wanted to make. So there were actually some characters I haven't even mentioned yet, mainly because it felt like they were kind of laid to the wayside in the movie itself, which is sad because I feel like some of these characters could have been very important. However, it just wasn't treated that way. So the Civil Rights Movement was a big subplot in the first half of the movie that I was talking about kind of disappears in the later half. And the Civil Rights Movement was so important, and I do believe it could have fit into this film. However, they didn't handle it quite like I would want them to. I felt like they could have, like I said, made the movie longer and had more of that interspersed, because it was important and it's about people getting their rights, just like these women were getting the right to have safety at work, you know? So it could have been put in there a little bit better. Egyptian mythology is a huge factor in this movie. One thing I didn't know about was that in the 1920s, people were obsessed with Egyptian things. They were obsessed with the mythology and the art and the makeup and all of that. And I would not have known that for this movie. I actually learned this fact from a makeup tutorial for 1920s makeup from Zabrena. She actually does research for historical makeup and stuff like that, and then she'll do her makeup like it. But I'll link the 1920s one down below. I tried to do it myself, but I don't think I quite handled it very well. But yeah, I felt like they didn't really go into detail about why there was so much Egyptian mythology in this movie. So for me, as a viewer who did not know this fact, I just thought the sisters were, you know, very interested in Egyptian mythology. I just thought that was the part of their character, that it wasn't like a historical, like a fashion thing. But yeah, they could have explained that a little better, or maybe showed other people being obsessed with Egyptian things. But from memory, I don't remember them showing anybody else but the sisters being obsessed with everything Egyptian. So then we get to the constant footage of the 1920s. I felt like them inserting constant footage of the 1920s was very distracting. And you would get to a point in the movie where you're watching the story play along, and then all of a sudden they'll put in some actual footage. And yeah, like I said, it was just very, very distracting. And sometimes they would even stylize some of the movie footage as footage from the 1920s. I kind of like that, but them inserting actual footage kind of was distracting. And I didn't mind it so much in the beginning because we're getting introduced to the era and things like that. I didn't mind it so much then, but it kind of just kept happening, and it was almost a surprise every time to me. I don't know why, but yeah, it just felt out of place. Hello, welcome to my book nook. In this segment of the video, we will be researching and discussing the actual story behind the movie we just watched. So normally I film my videos all in the same day, but yesterday I kind of ran out of time and I didn't want to really rush this segment of the video. I wanted to kind of take my time with it, and I don't want to like disrespect the actual story, you know. So we are going to be talking about the true story behind Radium Girls. And I have a lot of notes here on my laptop, and I checked out this book by Kate Moore, and I haven't read it yet, but I've started it, and I didn't have a whole lot of time this week. It's been very, very busy, But I wanted to get this done because it's Saturday now, and Monday I upload. So I'm running behind, and I hope that I can kind of bring the story to light because it's something I had no idea about. So, we are going to first talk about how they discovered radium. So, Marie and Pierre Curie discovered radium in 1898 in Paris. It was said that Marie carried a test tube of radium around in her pocket while she worked in the laboratory, and her body is still radioactive today. At that time, radium was considered a miracle cure for a lot of things, such as cancer and many diseases. It was said to extend life. Overall, it was kind of like snake oil. You know how people used to go on the corner and they would try to sell their snake oil supplements and snake oil stuff, you know. However, the difference between snake oil salesmen and radium pushers was the fact that radium actually was dangerous. I felt like a lot of the snake oil stuff was the placebo effect, whereas with radium it was actually dangerous. They may have had a placebo effect even with radium, but it was actually harming their bodies. So with snake oil, I felt like it was more harmless. Some of it, not all of it. Some of it may have been more harmless than with radium. So like I said, radium was not considered dangerous in the beginning. It was in fact considered a miracle cure, and it wasn't until way later that they admitted to the consequences of radium. So now we are on to the girls who may have inspired the movie. So there are two cases, one in New Jersey and one in Illinois. I believe that this movie was based more on the one in New Jersey, and I'll kind of discuss why that is. So the New Jersey case had 5 girls. There was Grace Fryer. I'm going to have to read off of here because I'm bad with names, okay? There was Grace Fryer, Albina Magia Larice, Quinta Magia McDonald. They were sisters, Albina and Quinta. Then we had Catherine Schaub and Edna Hussman. So we had 5 girls who were in the New Jersey case. I think Grace Fryer was the catalyst for this lawsuit, if I remember correctly. Like I said, I'm reading this, but I'm not done yet. But I'm going to include some online sources as well in my description, so you can read those. But Grace, I believe, was the woman who started the New Jersey case. She was so far gone at that time, though, that she only had about 4 months to live. So she ended up settling out of court, just like in the movie, you know. So that's one reason why I think it was inspired by the New Jersey case. And also, there were 2 sisters in the New Jersey case. And there was Bessie and Joe in the movie who were sisters. So, very similar. I want a documentary on this, you know. I need to look up if there is a documentary. That would be interesting. I need to look that up. One of the sisters in the case, Albina, she was struck really badly with radium poisoning, just like Grace Fryer. Albina and Quinta did have other sisters, just like Bessie and Joe. However, Albina had 6 other sisters, Quinta included. There was 7 of them, I believe. So there was a ton. And Quinta was the 5th child, which is why her name was Quinta. And also another coincidence that I found was that the company that the New Jersey case was suing was the United States Radium Corporation, which is a very similar name to American Radium in the movie. So, like I said before, there was an almost identical case in Illinois, and there was a bunch of different girls in there. So another point that I wanted to make was that the movie opted for an optimistic conclusion. I felt like they didn't want to leave off on a sad note, so they had our main character be Bessie, a girl who hadn't licked the brushes, a girl who hadn't been so stricken by radium poisoning, and a girl who still had a future and a chance at life. This, I believe, was to give the movie a more optimistic ending and conclusion. But Bessie, I believe, was inspired by a real-life person. There were 2 women who lived to be in their hundreds, and that was Mabel Williams and Mae Keane. So Mabel Williams lived until 2015 when she died. I'm going to include her obituary in the description. It lists so many different facts about her life, which is very interesting. These 2 women were a miracle for the Radium Girls. Most of them had died by radium poisoning, and these two women did not even have any complications from radium. This movie, I am disappointed in a way that they didn't use these girls' real names and they didn't do like the real story. I do feel like they couldn't have took as many liberties as they did. I felt like in a way it was out of respect, but I do want to see more about it. You know, I want to learn more about this. I really want to read this book if I have the time, and I may look for it on audio. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you want to further your reading, I'm going to include some sources where I got this information. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got something out of this. I know that this ended up being another long video. Sorry about that. Maybe next week will be shorter, I'm hoping. I'm hoping to do something a little more lighthearted. We will see. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next week. Bye.